Welcome back. You're at Ground Zero Salem with Pat, where inconsistency is job one. We're listening to some Deathhammer right now. It's been a little while. I haven't done an update in a bit. Been busy and uninspired. You know my shit. I come around when I feel like it. I think I'll probably ramp up and do a few more updates once I get back in the saddle here. But this is Chained to Hell, the latest full length from Deathhammer. They haven't done one in a while. This came out in 2018, but it's just great speed thrash metal from Norway. It seems a little bit more early 80s and a little bit more like classic heavy metal and rock and roll inspired from what I remember their previous record sounding like, but I haven't listened to that one in a while. At any rate, great, catchy, fun, headbangable, beer drinkable, speedy thrash metal stuff. So yeah, I have a bunch of stuff that I picked up from Caligari late last year. A few other odds and ends. And I've been on kind of, for lack of a better term, sort of a brutal, late 90s brutal death metal. Again, for lack of a better term. Just, you know, when death metal went a little bit more technical, heavy, you know, kind of a little bit of atmosphere, quote unquote, got kind of stripped away. There was more of an emphasis on, like, breakdowns and stuff like that. I very cautiously am dipping my toes into these waters because there's a lot of that stuff that's super overproduced that I didn't really care for. I love classic Suffocation and Cannibal Corpse like anybody worth their salt, but you know, and I grew up seeing bands like Internal Bleeding, who I liked a lot. It's just stuff that happened, I think, more in the 2000s, wasn't quite my cup of tea, production-wise and shit like that. But there were bands that I remember, drummer in my old band really liking, and stuff that was happening in the late 90s that I wanted to revisit, and I'm glad I did, especially with the case of this band right here, Sepsism from California. I remember these guys being talked about a lot. Cover art by Joe Patagno, who did all the Motorhead stuff, as well as some Autopsy cover art, and a bunch of like mainstream artists like Nazareth, but the guy responsible for the Motorhead Warpig. This is perfect if you're more into like an earthy, organic, kind of classic death metal recording style with nice pounding, real sounding drums, very heavy, dense, like guitar tone, doesn't sound all compressed, but it has those brutal, really abrupt, you know, kind of tempo shifts, slams if you want on it, and it just rages all the way through. It's super fucking catchy. It's really good. I think I remember the drummer in my old band talking about this when it came out. Kind of think of it in the same way I think of like Pessimist and the early Drawn and Quartered stuff, you know, all this stuff that I'm kind of getting into again and revisiting. This is top of the heap right now. I've been buying up a bunch of this shit lately. You know, when I get a chance, I'll talk about my rediscoveries of all this late 90s, more brutal DM stuff, but so far, this is my favorite thing that I've checked out. The only thing like that in this pile. Then there's a big old chunk here of Caligari releases. First up, a German band called Gravehammer, Primordial Principles, Fundamental Forces. This is classic sounding death metal that's pretty unique in its approach, pretty singular. It's got a very like mid-tempo, crushing, sort of double bass laden Celtic Frost riff approach, but very deep, you know, traditional death metal growling over everything. Classic 90s kind of death metal growls going on. And some cleaner vocals that are kind of spoken, shouted here and there. The riffing on it's great. Great vibes all over. It's just got like a super spooky kind of atmosphere to it. Put one in the A jar. My internal thesaurus is failing me. Then we got Seventh Circle with Cycle of Violence. This is also really singular sounding, super crushing. You know, I think there's something here for a lot of people, a lot of different demographics. In a lot of ways, it kind of harkens a little bit to the more mechanized, industrial-inspired, heavy death metal bands of the mid to late 90s, namely Godflesh, of course, Dead World, Skin Chamber a little bit. It's all organically recorded, just rhythmically it lapses into that kind of crushing, repetitive thing. I've heard and read like Melvin's comparisons. I'm not the biggest Melvin's head, so I can't really speak to that. But there's plenty of just classic, straightforward death metal too. Some interesting, almost kind of sampling, spoken kind of stuff going on. Very, very good. I believe they're from California. If I'm wrong, I'll put a correction quotation down below. Then you've got a young band from Finland, Perinei, if I'm pronouncing that right. Demo 2019, just a 3-song demo. I'd say honoring their death metal and hardcore forebears from their home country there. The drumming in it is super like punky, you know, almost D beats here and there, oompa kind of beats. You know, it's very like energetic, straightforward, kind of 4/4 drumming. I think it lapses into blasts once or twice on here if I remember right. But the music is super deep, heavy, guttural, Finnish death metal inspired kind of stuff. But it's got a super punk backbone, hardcore punk backbone. Really fucking good. Then Abysmalist from, I think, Oakland. Bay Area for sure. These have all been Caligari so far. Except for the Sepsism. Yeah, Reflections of Horror by Abysmalist. This is also like very death metal, but it has a certain punk kind of framework to it here and there. One of the members, I'm trying to think, it's a 2-man project. One of the members was in Sanctum, which was a great like crust stench band. I think both of the guys were in a band called Primal Rite that I've heard a lot about, but I've never really listened to. It's a little bit more like straightforward death metal with some gloomy, doomy, slow parts going on. There seems to be just like a little bit of crustiness to it that I can't quite put my finger on. Very good, suitably heavy. Got some kind of bolt thrower and autopsy stuff, like a lot of stuff from that region, I feel. Certainly not aping any particular band, though. Great, heavy, straightforward death metal with some slow parts here and there. Then the Undeath compilation of Decomposition. These guys have been big upped a lot. Young band. Guys are in their early 20s from Rochester, New York. The old stomping grounds, the homeland for me, upstate New York. Rochester has such a rich history for metal that people don't really talk about. Going back to not just bands, but venues like the Penny Arcade that used to host all the underground metal bands that would come through. It's where Dan Lilker lives now. I'm trying to think what else. Lethargy, that went on to be half of Mastodon, is from there. Pioneering technical death metal band. All kinds of shit from that town that doesn't get enough props. But Undeath are, kind of doing something a bit different with, again, I hate to use overused terms, but OSDM, this kind of cavernous or heavy or gloomy, echoey kind of incantation, autopsy inspired stuff that's been so hot for the past 10 years. They're weaving in, they're taking that kind of background, but weaving in all kinds of very technical and imaginative riffing, that far more belongs to like a Florida band along the lines of Atheist or Cynic. And they're kind of creating this tapestry of like these deceivingly complex riffs that sort of poke out through kind of primal and raw production. I mean, these are demos. They're recorded like demos. They sound like proper demos. And maybe that's why, maybe if they do on their full length, if they do something that's a little bit more cleaned up, it'll be a different effect. But I like the demo level, Seraphic Decay, early Relapse kind of recording style with more complex kind of riffing. Super good. The radio set on here sounds better than the demos, I feel. It sounds really good. I'm really looking forward to seeing these guys. They're playing a bunch of shows with Sanguis Sugabog and Vomit Forth. I'm going to at least one or two of them, hopefully. There's one here in Cambridge, Somerville rather. There's one coming to Somerville, and then there's one in Connecticut. So I'm not sure if I can get the day off for the one in town, but I will drive to Connecticut if I have to, because that's how much I like those bands. Next up, High Command, the Siddhartha demos. This was recommended to me on a previous video. Somebody hit me to the fact that this was for sale on a distro. Can't remember which commenter. I'll throw it in the captions because I have a shitty memory. But at this point, little bit late to the game with High Command. They're a local band, huge local band. I don't leave the house very often. I think I'm actually going to be seeing them for the first time this Sunday. But, you know, they've been getting a lot of clout, getting a lot of renown here in Boston as just a really good metal band with a lot of thrash influences and maybe some other kind of classic heavy metal stuff going on. I'd say that there's a lot for people that are into that modern thrash that's kind of more in the adjacent to the hardcore scene, you know, people that like Power Trip, people that like Foreseen and Enforced and stuff like that probably would get a lot out of this just because it's super catchy, fun to listen to kind of stuff, although I feel like there's a lot more like, I don't know, epic heavy metal, like true with a V kind of metal going into this. This was produced by Chris Corey, who's produced a lot of good stuff around here. He was in the legendary Mind Eraser, currently plays in Magic Circle, been involved in a ton of hardcore and metal projects. Excellent producer, does a really good job getting a certain kind of sound. And then it was mastered by Will Killingsworth, Willie Killy as he's known, out in Western Mass. And that guy does a lot of hardcore stuff too, makes it sound really great. But yeah, kind of like pretty vicious vocals for this kind of thrash stuff. Not going for that typical kind of crossover sort of shouting, more like kind of venomous metal vocals. Little touches of almost kind of Sabbathy stuff here and there amidst all the ripping thrash. Very good. You know, I can see why they've picked up so much steam. Amanda did get their LP recently, and I haven't had a chance to spin it yet. But this is on Hoftvod tapes. Thanks to homie who recommended it. All right, up next, Infernal Conjuration. Possibly my favorite from the pile. Infernale Metallum Mortis on Headsplit Records. This came out last year. Mexican band that really honors Seven Churches and Altars of Madness above all else. Heavy influence from those records. Really does that influence justice as far as that style of riffing goes. That sort of dizzying, just post-thrash into death metal, kind of like maybe classically inspired, complex riffing that Azagthoth pioneered back then, as well as Possessed. It's just really fucking good. There's not really too much else to say than that. If you like those aforementioned records, they do a bunch with that, as well as doing a little bit more of the kind of straightforward black thrash stuff a little later in the record, but all in all, it's a 10 out of 10 for me. Switching gears to more punk stuff here. Got the Death Ridge Boys. Full length on cassette. This was limited to like 50 or something like that. This is Oi. Street rock, street punk, whatever you want to call it. Anthemic, straightforward stuff with way more of a left-leaning kind of social consciousness to the lyrics than a lot of Oi bands. Reminds me of one of my favorites from the 90s, which was Those Unknown. Like that band, Death Ridge Boys have really well thought out, very inspiring, intelligent lyrics, which is sometimes kind of uncommon with this sort of stuff. They're from the Pacific Northwest, and it's just really catchy, kind of throaty, soulful, kind of Oi vocals. Not super fast, you know, more fist in the air kind of anthemic kind of stuff, but super good. Then we've got Warthog with the live tape. Again, another band I've been hearing about for years, haven't gotten around to checking out until now. This is an excellent live recording. It sounds really good. Came out just last year, I think. It's on Shout Recordings. Recorded live in Los Angeles, January of 2019. So yeah, came out last year. Warthog, I can see why they're kind of branching out of their own little sub-scene of, you know, the dirty kind of D-beat bands, because I think they have a little bit more to offer. There's a fair amount of just catchy anthemic, like 80s hardcore woven in, a la Poison Idea. A fair amount of like Motorhead rock and roll metal stuff, but without going into like a deliberate sort of motor-charged ineptcy kind of category. It's mixed up, it's chaotic enough, but there's great fucking songwriting throughout. I really fucking like this. All of their releases other than this are all 7 inches. I believe they have 4 of them. They're a New York band. They've been around for a while, at least half a decade, maybe longer. I would like to track down the 7 inches at some point. My lazy ass is waiting for maybe everything on one LP, or they don't seem like a CD kind of band, but a boy can hope. Next up, Excruciating Terror, Legacy of Terror Sessions. Classic grind from Southern California, LA area. Look at that tape. It's cool. As far as I know, this is their first 2 demos compiled. They were kind of lumped in with and played with a lot of the slap-a-ham, power violence kind of stuff. I know they were on Fiesta Grande compilations and fests and stuff, but they were far more of like, I wouldn't say death grind in the realm of like Carcass or Blood, but maybe more towards like when Napalm Death got a little bit more death metal friendly, or Terrorizer. Certainly they were probably playing shows with Terrorizer for a while there. Very harsh recording on these, very fucking raw. Definitely not for everybody if you have a sensitive ear for distortion and everything, but you can hear the riffs and the sort of the death metal and metal qualities coming through. I recommend everything this band has put out if you like grindcore. They have 2 LPs and I think like a live 7-inch, something like that. Then a couple of demos by this band Ghouli, who, if I remember right, are from Virginia, Richmond, I think. Fucking awesome band. I just got hip to them via social media, Axe to Grind group. And they were pitched as kind of like, hey, if you like more the gloomy, horror-inspired hardcore punk from the 80s, you would probably dig this, and I definitely do. It's got a lot of like TSOL, 45 Grave. The vocalist kind of reminds me of somewhere in between Dinah Cancer from 45 Grave and the guy from Die Kreuzen. The first Die Kreuzen LP has also got that sort of influence on here, I feel. They have 2 tapes. This new one, new EP, Nothing, is, you can tell they're really getting their footing here. It's very solid. The self-titled's very good as well, but I feel like their sound's getting a little bit more cohesive with the death rock or kind of morbid hardcore influences on this. It's very catchy, very well written. Kind of got a little bit of that Void and like Die Kreuzen, kind of like maybe a little bit loose and chaotic stuff going on, but also like the atmosphere of Christian Death and 45 Grave and stuff like that. That's the self-titled for you. Very cool. As far as I know, I think these are self-released. Damn is the name of the label. I'm not sure if it's theirs or not, but yeah, Damn Records there. I'll put a link to their Bandcamp. Cheap too. It's like $5 a tape, so you can't go wrong. I got this free in an order. I ordered a bunch of stuff from Reaper last year. I got that Maximum Penalty reissue, and those are good dudes. They occasionally like throw in a bonus 7-inch or something. They threw this in for free. This is Done Dying. Shelf Life. This came out about 5 years ago. An EP, California band. Older dudes, played in some classic stuff. You got Dan O'Mahony on vocals, who is in No for an Answer, 411, Carrie Nation. I think of maybe 1 or 2 other bands. Great iconic hardcore vocalist. Kind of gruffer, deeper vocals, but it has like this sort of posy tinge to him. Almost like if a New York hardcore guy was trying to sing like a dude from Uniform Choice. Very expressive vocalist, good lyricist too. And then, if I'm not mistaken, Mike Hartsfeld, who's the guy who ran New Age Records, plays guitar on this. Yeah, Mike Hartsfeld on guitar. And it's just super impassioned, fast, pissed hardcore stuff. I really dig it. You know, it's got like that kind of Orange County, I've got something to say, kind of positive sort of thing going on. And then Foreseen, the new Foreseen single, Wide Awake Nightmare, self-released. Gotta love self-released stuff. You know, this has like the classic like Disgorged style folded envelope kind of thing going on. 2 songs, Infiltrator and Wide Awake Nightmare. Foreseen, out of all those bands I just talked about, those new wave of like crossover bands, the hardcore adjacent thrash metal bands, if you want to call them, Foreseen were one of the first, and probably my favorite Finnish band, if you don't know them. All their stuff always seemed a little bit more like Blitzkrieg crazy than a lot of their contemporaries, like Power Trip. Almost kind of had sort of a Teutonic bite to me, as well as, like, you know, the thrashier New York crossover stuff, which is the main influence on all those bands. This one, I feel like it's breathing a little bit more. There's less riffs stacked on top of riffs. There's a little bit more, like, spread out kind of songwriting between these two songs. It might be my favorite thing they've done so far. These two songs are very, very fucking good. I'm looking forward to a full length, hopefully in 2020. If they have that in the works, that would be great. This is a 45. It's got the big hole. And big hole. That's it. If I should mention, why not? You know how I am with vinyl colors. But Done Dying came on yellow, so cranked out a little update for you. You know, I missed everyone. I hope everyone's having a good 2020 so far. We'll see what's going on in the future. I've been gobbling up so much of this kind of like late 90s, you know, slammy, brutal death stuff that's like still kind of rooted in classic death metal somewhat, so I want to talk about that. But goddamn, have I purchased a fair amount of that. Yeah, we'll see. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.